Today on We Tell You, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's fantastic tale, The Little Prince. This is the story of the Little Prince. It all begins in the African sky when a pilot suffers a mechanical failure in his airplane and is forced to make an emergency landing in the Sahara Desert. Like a shipwreck survivor in a sea of sand, he gathers his provisions and inspects his plane's engine, confirming it's broken and he must fix it to survive. After his first night sleeping in the desert, he awakens to find a child with blonde hair, a curious face, and dressed in the attire of a small prince, both proud and inquisitive. Upon seeing him awaken, the child insists the pilot draw him a lamb, as he needs it to prune the weeds on the asteroid where he lives. Completely surprised to find this child in the middle of the desert and overwhelmed by his persistence, the pilot tries to recall how to draw and remembers the first time he drew. It was after reading a book about the virgin forest, which described how boas can swallow an entire animal. He then traced his first drawing with a colored pencil. When he showed it to his teacher and the grown-ups, he asked if they were scared, to which they replied why a hat would scare them. Frustrated by the adults' response, he made a second drawing, depicting the inside of the boa constrictor so that the grown-ups could understand. The pilot, unable to draw a lamb and under the little prince's insistence, redraws the boa from his childhood. But our protagonist doesn't approve of the drawing, stating he didn't ask for a boa with an elephant inside. So the pilot tries again, but the little prince isn't satisfied with any of his drawings. In one, the lamb looks sick, and in another, it looks like a ram. Finally, the pilot draws a box with holes, and the little prince is filled with joy, saying it's perfect. The little prince peppered the pilot with questions, who answered as best he could, but even though it was difficult, he eventually understood that the little prince came from asteroid B612, a place the size of a house, where he lives with a flower, prunes weeds to prevent them from becoming baobabs that would choke his asteroid, and watches the sunsets. The little prince had a rose he loved very much. So, on the fourth day with the pilot, he asked if lambs eat roses. The pilot said yes, and that it didn't matter because he was fixing his airplane. The little prince insisted, fearing that the lamb the pilot had given him would eat the only flower on his planet. But the pilot answered distractedly until he grew fed up and told the little prince that he was trying to fix his plane and the matters of a rose weren't important, that the issues of war between thorns and lambs didn't concern him. The little prince then told him that he spoke like an adult, like the one he had met on an asteroid, a man who only calculated and had no time for anything, only interested in important things. But isn't it important to someone if on their planet there's only one flower, and its beauty is unique among 1,000 stars? Isn't the disappearance of that flower comparable to the stars going out? Then the little prince burst into tears, and the pilot, feeling guilty, forgot everything, and only cared about comforting the little prince. He took him in his arms, promising to draw a muzzle for the lamb and armor for his flower. But he felt very clumsy, not knowing how to reach the little prince, where to find him. The land of tears is so mysterious. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's work expresses how adults gradually lose the innocence, curiosity, and sweetness with which children view the world. On the Little Prince's planet, flowers occasionally appeared, blooming at dawn and disappearing at night. But one day a flower like no other was born, budding with the first light of morning. When the flower and the little prince saw each other, she told him to forgive her because she had just woken up and was disheveled. Our protagonist replied that she was very beautiful. The flower was proud and said she wasn't afraid of tigers. To which the little prince replied that there were no tigers on his planet. Then the flower asked if he didn't have a screen, as she was terrified of drafts, making the little prince believe she was a very complicated flower. Slowly, the love between the little prince and the flower grew complicated, as she was proud, demanding, and vain, sometimes saying hurtful things that left the little prince feeling desolate. He then thought that it was better to look at flowers and breathe their scent, but not to trust them. One day, taking advantage of a flock of birds flying by, the little prince left his planet, abandoning the flower, though not without remorse. He believed in his heart that he should never have fled, but rather understood her tenderness behind her meager ruses. It was just that the flower was so contradictory, and he was too young to know how to love her. The little prince begins his journey to other asteroids. The first he visits is inhabited by a king, who pretends to wield great power but lacks subjects to exercise it. He asks the little prince to stay with him, to follow his orders. But the little prince decides to continue his journey. On the next planet, he meets a lamplighter and his lamp, which he quickly lit and extinguished as his planet rotated very rapidly. The little prince sympathizes with this man, who performs his duty without question and leaves the planet with some regret. The little prince continues his journey, meeting characters and planets. For example, a geographer who lives surrounded by maps and books. He mistakes the little prince for an explorer and asks him for news and details of his world. When told about the flower, the geographer informs him that flowers are ephemeral, meaning they are destined to disappear, which awakens remorse in our protagonist for having left her alone. The little prince arrives on Earth, a planet notable for its large number of inhabitants and the synchronized actions of lamplighters worldwide, busy lighting and extinguishing the streetlights on all continents. He has arrived in Africa, where he encounters a snake who speaks to him in riddles, clarifying to the little prince that despite her appearance, she is more powerful than a king's finger, and can help him return to his planet. He also finds a lonely flower, whom he asks about humans. The flower replies that in her entire life she has seen no more than 6 or 7, and she believes men live bothered by having no roots. He climbs a great mountain and discovers the echo, which leads him to reflect on humanity's lack of originality. The little prince finally reaches the end of a path, next to a garden full of roses. He then discovers that the flower he left on his planet was not a unique flower, but one of many roses that exist. This deeply saddens him, and he promises to keep it a secret to prevent his rose from knowing. He meets a fox, who is also searching for a friend, a being to tame, meaning someone with whom to form a bond of friendship. They both become friends, and in this process, the little prince will discover what truly made his flower special. The fox and the little prince part ways after the fox reveals his secret. One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. The little prince finishes the story of how he arrived on Earth. It has now been a year since his arrival, and the pilot, who still hasn't been able to repair his plane, tells our protagonist that if they don't find water, they will die of thirst. They walk through the desert in search of water, and the little prince tells the pilot that it is good to have had a friend, even if one is going to die. The child is exhausted by the rigors of the Sahara and falls asleep thinking of his flower, while the aviator decides to carry him in his arms until they reach an oasis. They succeed, and the pilot gives the little prince water to drink. He tells him he must return to his plane to repair it. Then our protagonist remains alone. Next to the water well, where he regained his strength, there is a stone wall, and from there our protagonist speaks with a snake. She tells him it's time for the little prince to return to his planet, entwines around his ankle, and bites. The little prince is bitten by the yellow snake, just as the pilot returns from repairing his plane. He runs towards the little prince but cannot prevent him from being bitten, and only manages to hold him in his arms. The pilot knows the snake's venom will take effect in 30 seconds, and clumsily tells the little prince that he has already drawn his lamb, the box that will serve as its house, and the muzzle he requested, to which the little prince smiles. The pilot tells him that he has managed to repair his plane's engine, and the prince replies that today he, too, will return home. The pilot understood with melancholy that he would never see the little prince again, and the little prince told the pilot to remember that there is a flower on a star. Therefore, all the stars will be in bloom for him. So he remembers his smile. Then the little prince rose, took a step, and stood motionless for an instant. He did not cry out. He fell gently, as a tree falls, on the sand, without even making a sound. Years later, the pilot writes, "Look carefully at this landscape so you are sure to recognize it. If you travel one day through Africa, in the desert, and if you happen to pass by there, I beg you, do not hurry. Wait a moment, exactly under the star. If then a child comes towards you, if he laughs, if he has golden hair, if he does not answer when questioned, you will guess who he is. Be kind then. Do not leave me so sad. Write to me immediately. Tell me that the little prince has come back." And that was the story of the little prince. What did you think? Is there anything you would add to the summary? What emotions did the book make you feel? Tell me everything in the comments. If you want to help me, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support me personally, you can buy my book, The Spectacle of Life. Details in the description. Thank you very much, and until next time.